Good afternoon, everyone. And I know some folks from as far as Buffalo, this is what, 6? What time is this, Brother Mo?
Yeah, 6:10. Yeah.
6-ish, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So for other folks in Central, Dr. Davis, that makes it 5 for you. For me, it's 4. And then that leaves us with Dr. Claybrook at 3. We are ready to begin this entire important conversation, which is going to deal directly with what we call the dire or burning social issues of the time, but from the voice of the student. We are so glad for each one of you all who have gathered here. So let me just give some of the groundwork, if you will. There will be each institution goes in the order. We have Buffalo State that will lead off, followed by California Long Beach, St. Xavier, Kennedy King, and the University of Wyoming. So just to think about you all being here, and particularly, can you guys see us? Can you see our crowd, or do you just see me?
We can only see you.
Okay.
I see a semblance of a crowd, but it's a smaller picture.
So we have a group here from the University of Wyoming that is indeed participating and ready to go, but a lot of them are eating now. You all know how that goes, right? So we got Subway Deluxe. That's Jersey Mike's. So with that, we're gonna just bring it and make sure that our goal here today is to give a non-normative experience for you all to be able to deal with what I believe. And let me take a step back. My name is Frederick Douglass, and I direct the Black Studies Center here at the University of Wyoming. Last name is Dixon. I'm only Dixon on payday. Why is that? Because that's a complete reminder of me carrying on a name that was given to someone, that was given to someone, that was given to someone by a slave owner. So to understand what we want to do today is to reverse the ideas of students always being talked to. And you all now beginning this conversation amongst yourself as we learn from you. That's the idea. In the long run, this particular space wants to deal with reconciliation. But to deal with reconciliation, we have to go through more steps. We have to go through acknowledgement, atonement, before we can get to reconciliation. So we are gathered here together today for the second annual Anti-Racism Collective Symposium to continue that process. So from here, we have a group. So every institution will give you some sort of prompt. Some may be a little different than others, but everybody's welcome to have your opinion about the prompt and please join in. So the idea is for us to have a conversation. Many folks confuse the idea of a conversation, examination, or some sort of argument. What we will do, you all, is we'll share our differences of opinion, and as long as we do it in a respectful manner, it's not going to always be pleasant. So in that regard, please feel free to inject your thoughts into the conversation. But again, let's do it for the betterment of humanity. Let's do it in a respectful way. Those are the only guidelines. So, Marcus, Dr. Du Bois, Watson, if you are ready to take over and move from the very first piece, first of all, Dr. Du Bois Watson worked at the University of Wyoming for how many years?
9 years.
9 years. So he's familiar with all of us, and he's becoming familiar with the rest. So feel free, and we will move along as we've stated. And thank you for coming, and thank you for wanting to be a part. Everybody put your hands together. This is for everyone. Go right ahead.
Thank you, sir, my brother. Very special thanks to you, Dr. Frederick Douglass, if I may, and to the Black Studies Center at the University of Wyoming. I want to thank everybody who was in attendance today. I don't know about y'all, but hope is this kind of thing where we can share critically important ideas and challenge each other, but for the sake of bettering humanity. Special thanks to my students, the 2 students who are doing this with me, It has been an honor getting to know you as we've been working on this presentation. We are representing Buffalo State University, and particularly the Africana Studies program at the university. I am Dr. Marcus Dubois Watson, but if we want to say just Marcus Dubois, that's cool with me. This semester, I am teaching an Introduction to Africana Studies course, and two of my star students are with me today. Elijah Giscombe is here. Maybe she can wave. Second year, but of junior standing, arts and letters with dance concentration as a major, also majoring in writing. And we also have with us Brandon Robinson, a first-year student majoring in computer information systems. The topic we would like to bring to all of us today is to discuss the Buffalo Massacre of May 14th, 2022, when an 18-year-old white male supremacist mass murdered 11 Black people and injured 3 others who were shopping at a grocery store in a predominantly Black neighborhood in Buffalo, New York. With that, I will turn it over to Elijah.
Hello. As Professor or Dr. Watson had said, I am one of the students in this Intro to Africana Studies class at the current moment, and currently we have 2 videos that we want to present to you. So one of the videos being essentially an overview or like an overlay of the incident that occurred, and it's basically a news report in simpler format. But then the other video is a 1-minute-ish video, whereas the one I was just previously talking about is 3 minutes. And this video is essentially a statement that the persecutor, not the persecutor, but the person essentially who committed this atrocity had made at this incident, had essentially said what they felt the need to say in that sense. We have a few questions to sort of probe some thinking and whatnot, and 3 of them that I'd like you to consider during these videos are, well, 1, what is your initial gut reaction when watching these videos? And then 2, what should be done about white men who are the ones who keep being the mass shooter of Blacks? And then the 3rd one being, what needs to be reformed at a government and community level to prevent the conditions that lead to such atrocities? Now, I can post the videos, I can post the questions in the discussion, the private chat, so that they're there to, be of reference, but I will present these videos. Again, the first one is the sort of overview of the incident that occurred and some responses from the community, and the second is a statement this man has made at his sentencing. So.
York.
When I first saw him shooting, he shot a woman, he shot a deacon, he shot another woman, and then he went in the store and started shooting again.
10 people shot dead and 3 more injured after a gunman opened fire at a Tops Friendly supermarket in a predominantly Black neighborhood.
This is the worst nightmare that any community can face.
One's gun secure, one suspect is in custody.
The suspect, identified as 18-year-old Peyton Gendron, has been arraigned on one count of first-degree murder and held without bail. Authorities say he drove there from 200 miles away and live-streamed the attack that is now being investigated as a hate crime.
This was pure evil. It was straight up racially motivated hate crime from somebody outside of our community.
Police say around 2:30 Saturday afternoon, the suspect wearing body armor and a tactical helmet first fired at 4 people in the parking lot, killing 3.
We're going to need some officers inside the tops because we have numerous bodies.
The shooter then entered the grocery store, shooting 9 others, including a retired Buffalo police officer who confronted him. The guard fired multiple shots that hit the suspect, but that didn't stop him. He was wearing protective tactical gear. The heavily armed gunman fatally shooting the guard moments later.
I still don't even believe it happened, actually, that a person would go into a supermarket full of people.
Police arriving at the chaotic scene, taking the alleged shooter into custody.
There were people showing up, asking about their loved ones.
Among the victims, 4 of them store employees.
My granddaughter works there. She heard the shooting, so she took herself and ran in the bathroom and locked the door.
I frequent this store all the time. I've never been afraid to be here. I am now. This is something that I watch on the news that happens in other places.
A witness describes the motionless bodies on the ground.
I saw the police cover her, and then they cover somebody that was behind her. And I realized at the time that those were dead bodies.
New York Governor Kathy Hochul calling attention to reports the suspect had a camera and was live streaming the shooting, condemning social media platforms that she said were out censoring hateful and violent content.
I'm asking them to take responsibility for monitoring the hate speech and the calculated plans that are right there in plain view. Help work with us with your responsibility as the individuals who profit from these platforms.
The NAACP making a statement saying hate and racism have no place in America.
Again, that was the first video, and I will be sharing the second one now. Just give me 1 second.
I'm very sorry for all the pain I forced the victims and their families to suffer through. I'm very sorry for stealing the lives of your loved ones. I cannot express how much I regret all the decisions I made leading up to my actions on May 14th. I did a terrible thing that day. I shot and killed people because they were Black. Looking back now, I can't believe I actually did it. I believed what I read online and acted out of hate. I know I can't take it back, but I wish I could. And I don't want anyone to be inspired by me and what I did.
All right, and I believe we are moving on to Brandon.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. Once again, my name is Brandon Robinson. I'm a first year at Buffalo State University, and I'm studying computer information systems. And I just wanted to thank you all for allowing me to be a part of this great opportunity. So after that, I just wanted to say that the Buffalo Massacre is not an isolated event. This has been something that's been going on for years and years and years, dating back to all the way to the 1800s. There's been a consistent pattern of mass killings of Blacks at the hands of white extremists, not only in the United States, but globally as well. And in this pattern, it seems like these extremists are having little to no consequences. So I'm just going to take this time and list only a few of many of mass killings that have happened in the past. So first, we have the Devil's Punch Bowl in year 1865, where white male Union soldiers were held in, I don't know how to pronounce it, sorry, Natchez, Mississippi, and they corralled tens of thousands of blacks, and they tormented and treated them inhumanely, and over 20,000 people lost their lives, and nobody was held responsible. Next, we have the Herero Genocide from 1904 to 1907, where white male German colonists put thousands of Africans into concentration camps and carry out plans to kill all black men in the area, drive men, women, and children into the desert, and die. Nobody was held responsible. Next, we have the Elaine Massacre in 1919, where white male mob, killed hundreds of black men in Arkansas for attending a union meeting to strategize a better pay and working conditions. No whites were prosecuted here either. Next, we have the Tulsa Massacre in 1921, where mobs of mostly white men with government military support destroyed 35 city blocks of black businesses and homes. Hundreds of blacks were murdered and nobody was prosecuted here either. Next, we have the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in 1963, where white male KKK members bombed a black church, killing 4 innocent black girls. I believe they were still in the single digits, under the age of 10, and they were in Bible study. Here we have 3 of 4 white killers that were convicted. Next, we have the MOVE organization bombing in 1985. Nearly 500 mostly white male police officers lay siege in the home of black nationalist members of the MOVE organization, including the bombing of the home and killing 11 black inhabitants. Only 1 person survived. And I don't think anybody was incarcerated here either. Next, we have the Marikana Massacre in 2012, a little more recent, where mostly white male South African security forces opened fire in a protest by black mine workers, who were fighting for better working conditions and salaries. 78 blacks were injured, 34 were killed, and mostly by assault rifles. Next, we have the Emmanuel AME church shooting in 2015, where a white male supremacist gunman opens fire at Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, killing 9 black parishioners while praying. And then, most recently, we have the May 14th Buffalo Massacre, where a white male supremacist gunman opens fire at a Tops-friendly market in a predominantly black Buffalo neighborhood, killing with the intent of killing as many blacks as possible. He succeeded in killing 10 of those blacks and wounding 1 other. Yeah, so all these horrible events that really have no place in the world. It just breaks my heart to hear about them and learn about them, just to see that it doesn't only happen here. It happens like back in our home country, the motherland, Africa. And it's just really sad to see. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Watson now.
Thank you, my beautiful, brilliant students. So we turn it over to all of us. We asked those 3 questions. Feel free to respond directly to those or any other thoughts you might have. We understand what's happening next as a conversation among all of us. Just so we can reiterate those 3 questions. What is your initial gut reaction feeling when watching the videos? The second one was, what should be done about white men who are the ones who keep being the mass shooters of blacks? And the third question, what needs to be reformed at a government and community level to prevent the conditions that lead to such atrocities? If you're speaking, I don't hear. Do you guys hear? Okay.
I think he's muted.
Okay.
You're good now. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Right. Thank you. First of all, thank you all for making this a very interesting introduction. at the core of what we see at the massacre, multiples. Can anybody, and anybody can answer this, what's at the core of this idea of Black bodies and massacres? Can anybody help me? Anybody at home can go as well.
So we can answer to that too.
You can absolutely answer that, please.
I
Rakia,
don't want.
you at Kennedy King?
Yes.
All right, well, all right with Kennedy King. I did a lot of time over there. It's nothing but love. Go right ahead, 63rd Street.
I don't want to say the wrong answer. I don't know if it's a right or a wrong answer to this, but I'ma just go ahead and say it. I say it's racism to me. And I can honestly say this because if you really paying attention and you watching, it's more so whites killing blacks. And then they doing it like at school, it's at home. And this is certain things they don't even show, like for TV. They don't put these things on the internet. They don't want these type of things to like reach our social platform systems. Like, it's kind of weird, I would say.
Thank you for the answer, Rakia. Anybody want to jump right in? And she says this idea is simply racism. Anybody at home can answer. Anybody here can answer. But go right ahead, Dr. Davis.
Yeah, I would agree with Ms. Wallace. Racism and the dehumanization of Black bodies and Black people, right? I think those two things coincide. We can't under acknowledge the stripping of the humanity of Black people, which allows all of these things to happen and often go unpunished, as the young man highlighted, which is important. Not only did these massacres happen, people weren't punished for it, which is inconceivable. So that shows you that the value of their lives was low to society.
So we got the act, and then we got the system that supports the act. So if the system supports the act, like we know many systems do, the actions, attitudes, and the behavior goes to the psyche, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And if we're thinking about the psyche, about one in a massacre or one who feels like one is less than human, then let's start there. This idea, this difference of dehumanization of one, while we hold one in a position of valid or let's say supreme humanization. Anybody here want to jump right in? Because we did come together to talk, you all. And there are no wrong answers, and we're going to do it with respect and love. But we didn't come here for everybody to be quiet. We came here to have a conversation about what's going on in your thoughts. How many times did the teacher sit and tell you, well, turn to page 41? And we're going to have a quiz on this. Let us begin to have a conversation that stretches out so your children will have the same conversation because you will be able to have it with them. Somebody had their hand up. Go right ahead, Sir Jim.
Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah, go right ahead.
I think part of the reason why is because as like the way history shook out, Black people just got the short end of the stick, right? Africa right now is one of the poorest countries. It has the least infrastructure.
Africa's a continent.
As a continent, excuse me, sorry. One of the poorest continents that has the least infrastructure. And in other countries, Black people are the minority. And it's easier to kick someone when they're already down, right? So I think what we need to do is find a way to elevate Black people and other minorities so that we're on more equal footing.
Okay. I really like that you took the initiative to say what you felt. And that's all this is. Now, let's get back to what we have to tie to the conversation. We do our best. If one of us knows better than the other, then we put the answer out there. Absolutely, it's a continent. Dr. Du Bois said 54 countries. He would know. He spent plenty of time there. But let us make sure that we don't demean the answer, that we learn from the answer. I see your hand up. Go right ahead, Dr. Marcus Du Bois Wise.
Yeah. When you touch on the mental and the psychology, what comes to my mind, and I'm not saying I have a conclusive feeling about this, but I want to put it out there and see what we think. What comes to my mind with these massacres, what is the relationship between white men, or some of them, feeling more human the more they can dominate and in these cases kill Black bodies? What's the relationship there?
Good
You know,
question.
yeah.
It's a great question. As a Black man, I need to right now defer to a white man. Anybody here? Mr. Klein, don't have me call you out. You know you my guy. Can you answer that in your own thoughts? No wrong answers. Can you give us your thoughts?
I can try my best.
Yes, sir.
But yeah, I think that, like, especially in the context of the United States and the way that we have treated Black bodies as a white male dominated society, has often been to relegate Black men, Black women, Black trans individuals to not even like second class level of society, but like even lower than that. We treated the Black community as property for incredibly long duration in this country. And to believe that that sort of mindset and that sort of perspective on race relations in the United States, as we see even as recently with the May 14th Buffalo massacre and everything, that has changed in any dramatic way is hard to believe. And then you get a lot of additional pushback on really fundamental things, such as like what's taught to our students in school, because we're afraid of making young white children to fear for their status in life because they're told of the really atrocious actions that were committed against the Black community in this country historically and contemporarily. So I think that relationship goes all the way back to the time of the transatlantic slave trade and continues all the way through to today, where we can't even acknowledge the simple fact that the remnants of slavery and racism are still present and ever holding on this country and its white male-dominated society.
I really thank you for that whole thought. I really just want to put my hand on you allow us to have the question. Now, let's go even further, because that's what many ways we want to do here. Mr. Klein, thank you for your answer. And over this historical period that has been this nefarious set of circumstances that has guided our relationships to where they are now, for white men, is there a concern as you live, as you breathe, and in the future, that somehow there's going to be retribution for those actions? Is that part of this overarching thought that connects us to this dehumanization? Go right ahead.
I have concern for being held accountable for actions, which I didn't do.
Okay.
Looking at what's happening to white people in South Africa,
Okay.
and repatriation, and there's a lot of violence going on, and I have concern about that carrying over here and being held accountable for sins I didn't commit.
Okay. Does anybody agree with him? Anybody like to add on? Anybody at home who says these are sins he didn't commit?
Which I wasn't even alive for.
Which he wasn't alive for. But you still benefit from right now today.
No, I disagree with that.
Okay. Tell us why you don't think you benefit from white privilege.
I don't think it exists.
Okay. We're glad you're here.
Yes, we are.
We're very glad that you're here. And I see you came in a little bit late, but that'll make the number.
Came from the blockchain committee.
Okay, good. And no, we need students to jump in, Dr. We need students to jump in, because this would be just like another class if I continue to lead it. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I mean, like I find the perspective of like being held accountable for things that you didn't do interesting, for the fact that, like, based off of what I had said earlier, that like the remnants of society exist and perpetuates a form of racism that, to be quite honest with you, the institutions and the systems that exist are not designed to keep people like you and me accountable for things like that. That's why I actually have like a bit of a disagreement. Sorry, is there feedback going on?
Dr. Watson, can you move real quick? Go right ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So like, just to the point of, because I mean, one of the questions that was presented is like, what is to be done with the white individuals that commit these atrocities? And while I think that there should be incredible amounts of accountability and responsibility that should be paid for these actions, in relying on our carceral systems and those institutions that were never set up to hold white people accountable for their actions anyway, is asking for a system that's designed to, again, perpetuate that racism to somehow solve the problem of racism that exists in these massacres. And so I guess to kind of like circle back to this concern of, well, I'm going to be held accountable for things that weren't my fault. One, you do benefit from it still immensely in this country by being white, by being male. And two, it's not necessarily a matter of being punished for sins that you didn't commit. It's a matter of being accountable for the actions that this country has committed and moving forward in a way that actually promotes equity within this country. And it's not about punishment to you as an individual.
Okay, excellent. Go right ahead.
Yeah, it's kind of building off the same thing you said, but it's not. So like the having to pay for what you didn't do, I think it's not so much as that as recognizing that there's still people who like alive today who had to go through that. And it's not so much acknowledging what we did individually or like what we did, it's acknowledging how like, yeah, we benefit from it. So, or like how others have suffered from it, and not necessarily like paying back or having individual punishments or retributions, but instead making acknowledgements of how you can build and fix those things moving forward. And yeah, just acknowledging how you do benefit from it. I mean,
Acknowledgement, atonement.
right. And so, and I think the faster like we do acknowledge it, the faster we can rebuild. And so, I mean, white men do benefit. I mean, studies show that you're more likely to get a job just based on being white alone, whereas you can have the same exact education, background, merits, and have a significantly lower chance of getting jobs or being accepted into colleges. So it's even those small little details that you can see as a white man or even a white woman or like wherever else you're at an advantaged group, that you do benefit from that. And so it's like just kind of building off.
Did everybody feel a little tension go up when he made this comment and we went back and forth? The tension is okay because we all bring our biases to the table. And we came together as a collective to see the differences so that we can look at how to move forward. I saw you with your hand up. Did you have your hand up? I thought so. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Please just tell us who you are. I'm sorry for everybody who didn't.
I'm not a student. My daughter's a student.
Athalia?
Yeah.
Okay.
So coming from a mixed home, my kids are half Mexican and half white. My family is very diverse. And so we're kind of split 50-50, Black and Mexican. And we had to teach our children at a very young age to act differently. There was a different set of rules for us that didn't apply to our white counterparts. And so we couldn't break the same rules, right? They couldn't react the same way when they were stopped by police. If my children, my nephews, my cousins had committed a crime, they're gonna do double, triple the time that their white counterparts are gonna do, just based on race. It could have been a first-time offense. But back to the white male thing, I think white men are afraid.
Afraid of?
Of retribution. I think they're afraid of having to admit that their ancestors were wrong. They're afraid of having put a people down so hard and so long that still rise above and succeed to heights that they can't stand. They truly, to their bone marrow, can't stand it. And it's hard for them. When some of them are given all of these a leg up and a hand up, and you know, and some of their children don't succeed. And other children, African children, especially inner city children, that Some don't have what they would call a chance, right? And they succeed beyond. They're afraid of what the people can do that they have put down if they just let them go.
You know, the key to this is some folks know no different. For you all who are students here, how old were you when Barack Obama became the president?
17 years old.
Okay.
I took her to vote with me.
So to think about that as a way to get back to this and then move along, because this is an excellent way to start. For you, most of your life, you had a black president. How did that make anyone feel? For the majority of your life, you had a black president. And then we're going to go back to you, let you finish up. We're going to question it, then we're going to move along. Anybody, your thoughts about being a young person who literally grows up with a black president? Blackface, if you will, not in a negative sense. What role did that play?
If I may, I know for myself as a young child, I actually had the privilege to see future President Obama when he was just an elect, like he was a possibility of someone that the DNC would choose as a potential candidate. He was trying to speak to teachers at an NEA convention. And as a 7-year-old in the very back of this very, very large conference hall, I see this, black man speaking to a crowd, and it resonated with me. And I remember talking to my white mother at the end of it and telling her, I think that's going to be our next president. And, my mom having to grapple with the fact that how do you tell your 7-year-old daughter we live in a racist country that may not choose a black president? How do you, get a small child who has hope in their eyes for a future that reflects them? How do you tell them? How do you share that with them? And that was something that she had to grapple with. And I'm not gonna lie, Dr. Dixon, I was like, no, I know America's racist, but he's gonna be a president. I know it. And but that was just me as a 7-year-old. And when he won, I remember feeling that excitement because there's a president now that reflects, me and who I am. And as a biracial child, seeing a biracial president, not to take away from his blackness, but additionally, his biracial identity was something else at that time in my life that I also identified with. And so it was twofold for me. It felt like a double victory.
And that speaks, thank you, because that speaks volumes for us putting this in time and space for the students. So for the majority of this, a key part of your life where you had a black president, there were many folks who never saw anything of the sort. So that as a part of what we know now that has shaped our current situation. And as we wrap up, before we move along, Marcus, you guys got anything else that you wanted to add? Dr. Du Bois, you want to add to this part? Unmute yourself. He says he can't find it. That's what I think he's saying. He says yes. The same one you pressed before you went silent on us. First of all, look at that shirt. You gotta like the shirt, right? I'll say, let us conclude this part and move forward. And let's keep this on the table. Tell us your name again.
My name's Nick.
Nick said that white privilege doesn't exist. I think we'll find a way to inject that into the future conversations that we're gonna have. But I kind of want to keep everybody's time as best we can. So we're moving right along to California State University, Long Beach, and what I consider to be one of the most needed professors in the United States today, Dr. Claybrook, who I'm a fan of and very fond of, this young man. And he's been here before, virtually. So all we gotta do is get you out here now. But if you could take right off with your piece, and we are waiting for you. And thank you. Everybody put your hands together. Thank you for bumping up.
Sorry, Toby, we were trying to figure out how to get the PowerPoint.
All right, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Dr. Douglas, thank you for inviting me. And once again, thank you to Michaela Winfrey for joining us today as well. Can everyone see the screen that we're sharing? Is it showing?
No, nope, we can't see it.
You can't see it. Okay, still working.
Let me. Oh, it just popped up on my end. I'm gonna add it to the stream. We should be.
Oh,
to go.
Is that good?
So there was another student who was going to be here with us, but he got sick and is unable to make it. But Michaela is very well. She can handle it very well on her on her own. And what we want, I think, what we're going to contribute to the discussion, I think, flows very well from what we just saw from the Buffalo massacre, with this very explicit and in your face, raw, racist attack on Black people. And what we have to contribute is another aspect of the conversation about racism, and the work that we have to do moving towards an anti-racist campus, anti-racist society, something that's a little bit, that's a lot more insidious than overt. And so, just real quick, as introduced, my name is Dr. Keith Claybrook. I'm an associate professor at Cal State Long Beach. I teach many of our history classes, critical thinking, research methods. My area of interest is actually Black student activism and the Black freedom movement with a focus on Los Angeles. And Michaela is a graduate student who got her she's actually got her bachelor's degree from here from Cal State Long Beach. She's a double major in Africana Studies and History. Here, I'm going to turn it over to Michaela to take us through and walk us through this, the rest of the conversation.
Yes, so beginning with some key definitions that we were trying to work with, there is Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist book. And so from there, we've pulled some important concepts with their definitions that moving forward, we would like to keep in mind as we're continuing this discussion. So firstly, racism, as Kendi posits, connotes power, policies, and ideas. So it is something that is structural, systemic, institutional, connected, or plural. So there's a powerful collection of unjust or inequitable policies that are justified by ideas of racial hierarchy. This is different from racist, which connotes a power, a policy, or an idea. So what is individual or singular, such as a single racist policy or idea, or a single person who is being racist. So these are important things that we need to keep in mind as we talk about things like internalizing racism versus internalizing racist ideas. Additionally, it's important to remember an anti-racist is one who is expressing an idea of not racial hierarchy, I apologize, is actively supporting a policy that leads to racial equity or justice. And then furthermore, anti-racist ideas convey that racist policies and practices are the cause of racial inequities. So when thinking of critical questions to present, there were several that came to mind, but I've chosen to highlight a specific question, which is, can a student truly be anti-racist without majoring, minoring, or taking ethnic studies classes? Because there's something to be said about prioritizing, privileging, and acknowledging ethnic studies as a perfectly valid form of education. It is not solely something that, is a minor. It could be a very respectable major, and there are very many important figures within our society who have their degrees in ethnic studies and have contributed so much, and yet to this day, we see it being overshadowed by traditional fields of study and not given its due diligence. And so I would ask then, can a student truly be anti-racist without privileging something like ethnic studies? And then moving forward, we have a quote from June Jordan talking about Black studies. And it says, the engineer, the chemist, the teacher, the architect, if he is Black, he cannot honorably engage career except as Black engineer, Black architect. Of course, he must master competence, the perspectives of physics, chemistry, economics, and so forth, but he cannot honorably or realistically forsake the origins of his possible person, or she cannot, nor can he escape the tyranny of ignorance except as he displaces ignorance with study. Study of the impersonal, the amorality of the sciences anchored by Black studies, the urgency of his heart, his breath, demands the knowing of the truth about himself, the truth of Black experience. And so, Black students looking for the truth demand teachers least likely to lie, least likely to perpetuate the traditions of lying, lies that deface the father from the memory child. We request Black teachers of Black studies. It is not that we believe only Black people can understand the Black experience. It is rather that we acknowledge the difference between reality and criticism as a difference between the host and parasite. And with that, we thank you and we turn back to that question of how can you be an anti-racist student without privileging something like ethnic studies? Thank you.
And so one of the things that's, so just this piece by June Jordan is an excerpt out of her piece, Black Studies, Bringing Back the Person in 1969. And many of the issues that she raises here are still very much so with us, here in 2023. So when we take a look at the attack on Black studies in Florida and other states, when we take a look at even those who, if you can get a major, you can get a degree up to a doctoral degree. There's over 12 universities that offer a PhD in Africana studies or in African American studies, and hundreds around the country where you can get your bachelor's degree. But if we find value and appreciation in the contributions of this discipline, then we need to have in job descriptions and job qualifications, where is it listed that, with the requirements and the degree requirements and fields and related fields, why aren't these fields listed? There's something to be said about engaging not only the overt racist practices, policies, laws, and actions like we saw in the previous presentation, but also there's something that has to be examined on a deeper fundamental level as it relates to knowledge, understanding knowledge, knowledge production. As a very simple example of that, very basic example, I should put it that way. A very basic example is when I teach my critical thinking class, and I'll ask the students, have you heard of Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle? And they'll say yes. Whether or not you've read the work or not, you've heard those names. And when I ask, can you name any great thinkers from ancient times that come from Africa, that come from Asia, that come from the Americas, as if these other places don't have, great minds, great thinkers, and have the way in which they understand humanity, the way in which they understand knowledge, the way in which it contributes to the understanding of ourselves. Generally, what most students do is, if they have an answer, it will be Buddha. If they have an answer, it will be Buddha, which goes to the, again, the point of just a very basic understanding of knowledge and knowledge production. If we're not critical about it, even in our efforts to be anti-racist, we will continue to reproduce the same racialized and racist thought and thinking practices because we have not critically engaged on a fundamental level knowledge and knowledge production. So part of our conversation here is both the overt and the covert discussions of race, racism, racist practices and ideas, and what that means for us as students, what it means for us as scholars, what it means for us as residents, not only of the United States, but of the world. So we look forward to our dialogue.
Toby, can you?
Should be good now.
You're good.
Are we good? All right. Thank you all for the prompt. So to think about the question says, can you truly be anti-racist without being formally trained through things that you have no idea about? Can it really happen? That's one way I look at it. Anybody at home, anybody would like to get to that question? Can you really be anti-racist? And I'm not going to take away from Ms. Winfrey's thought, but can you really be anti-racist with only a Eurocentric view? With largely in part understanding Plato. But I understand Plato has spent at least 13 years at the feet of Egyptian professors. That's what I understand, which is much different than the common understanding. Is it possible for you to be anti-racist in what we know now as our traditional educational system alone, as we know it? Is it possible? Go right ahead, Val.
I do think it's possible. I think being a student means so much more than learning in a traditional sense. And getting real life experience and being immersed in different cultures and with different people can help you develop an anti-racist mindset when that's not necessarily all you're going to get with the traditional sense. You get that real life experience that you're not going to get sitting inside of a classroom, which I think is really important to becoming an anti-racist. And we can't disregard the fact that students are more than just what they are in a traditional sense.
Anybody else? Go right ahead.
I think I would agree in the sense that we also come home with the privilege of being able to go to college. And so I think like if to say like you have to take like actual designated ethnic study classes, I think it excludes a large group of people who don't have the privilege to go to college. I still think so. I think same kind of what she said that to surround yourself with those kind of people, you can seek out that information like yourself and still have the ability to be anti-racist. Because I think that would, I just think it would exclude a lot of people who do have that ability who are not able to have the same access to those classes that we do.
Okay, pivoting just a little bit. How does Africana, Afro-American, African-American studies align or fit in a hierarchy when it's compared to American studies and traditional history? Where does it fit?
According to who?
According to traditional formal education.
There is no place for it.
Okay. Okay. All right. So to think about being trained to be an anti-racist, what does that mean to anybody? How do you become trained to do anything? Anybody ever learn how to type? I still type like this. But I had all of the typing classes in high school. Didn't do well. Still don't know how to type. So how's this idea of understanding other, and we need to push this to a college campus. That's the idea. We need to push it to a college campus. How do we understand where African American studies sits? Let me just give a brief history. 1969, San Francisco State. My dear mentor, one of my greatest mentors, Dr. Nathan Hill, a great sociologist. We need to pay homage to him, and we do, because the name of our leadership group here at the University of Wyoming is the Dr. Nathan Hill Leadership Group. And to understand that, and I got this from his lips, when he injected Black studies, there was a Black science, there was Black arts, there was Black English, and once the campus and the higher education, if you will, community got their hands on that, that became remedial English, remedial science, remedial art. It's the push and pull that goes through. Just think about what we do here at the University of Wyoming. We have a very active space to be who we are and where we are. We're a very active space. And we're not active in compliance. We're active in challenge. And that puts us in a very unique situation on the college campus. Look around you. Do you see one administrator? Now, if this was diversity, equity, and inclusion, they had the term anti-racism collective symposium, it would be all across the campus and it would be part of something they could make money on. But this comes from the Black Studies Center, which means they kind of want to keep their hands off, but in a way they kind of want to choke it out. And the kind of is moved out the way. Let's be very clear that how can you become an anti-racist without training? Because becoming a racist in itself involves training. Some since our earliest infancy, right? So how do we become anti-racist? If what we know has made us, in many ways, look at other people in a dehumanization type of manner. And also, if you're white, you're the goose that laid the golden egg. It's so far removed from the reality of humanity that it has made many folks mad in their daily rhythms on how they respond to people, how they respond to questioning, how they respond to just the idea of someone else having multiple perspectives. Now that's what we're talking about, multiple perspectives. Anybody online want to answer that? How do we become anti-racist without training? Go right ahead, feel free. Because I'm gonna be honest with you, that's a great question, Ms. Winfrey. That gets right to the core.
So I think it's through, again, practice. You know, it's habitual. It's the nature versus nurture kind of aspect. In order to become any sort of, in order to adapt any sort of social perspective and bias on anything, you have to sort of be raised in it, whether it's short term or long term. And even with being racist, I think that there's certain points that happen within like an individual's life that like they sort of backtrack and like take a double take essentially to see like if they're moving properly or not. And I think in those notions, there's usually not a action of telling them that it's wrong, and more so just like quiet shame and passiveness, which I think in a lot of ways anti-racism has to exist in a way that's more assertive and aggressive, in a way that's like people standing in their own power, whether that's Black people saying that, you know, what you're doing is like clearly and blatantly wrong, or in a way that's making them sort of like study themselves and like figure out like what their humanity actually is. Because I think racism is, again, it's dehumanizing, and it questions what like sense of humanity do those people who hold those ideas have. So in order to become anti-racist, I think being able to, it's always this thing of going inward and figuring out where exactly you lie in this equation and how exactly are you contributing to the welfare of like humanity in itself. Because you could just be like contributing to the downfall, but think you're going towards something that's bigger and greater than you. And I think a lot of that stems from the fear of like the capitalistic mindset and the patriarchal mindset of like always wanting to conquer and be on top and not feel that you're left out of things. It's the fear of missing out, is FOMO in itself. And to become anti-racist in a lot of ways, it means to like decentralize that way of thinking and be like, this system not only is corrupt, but it's not even contributing to me. There are people at top who don't even care about me. They like, in very morbid ways, like nuclear warfare happens and like things like that happen because people think they have a certain amount of power that just does not demand anybody's like time or like need. Like people don't care about humanity in that sense. They just care about having power over something. You can't have power over people who never even like, who never not only like thought of you in that way as like important, but also like have their own lives. Like I think there's a lack of like being known, accepting that you're in a collective, but also focusing on the individual aspects and being able to like go about acknowledging that what you have to destabilize is something that's not only within yourself, but within the system and like within a collective. Sorry, I rambled a little bit.
Thank you. Excellent way to put it. Anybody else at home?
I have something.
Go right ahead. I'm sorry, you go right after her.
I think the us and them has to be, in my opinion, has to be conquered first, because that's where everything else trickles down from. There can't be an us if there isn't a them. So to get past that, and that's where the, you know, dehumanizing part comes in. If it's always the them, they're not the same as us, then you can always just separate yourself, and racists can continue to be racist or have racist ideas because it's always them. And so once they become part of that human like you said, collective. We're all just human, and they can't have that.
Anybody want to go right ahead? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, sir. Then you can go after him.
I was kind of going with what Elijah said there. I think you do need to be informed before you decide to join a movement. Because how can you fight against racism if you are not aware of the racism that's occurring, right? And I think people who do join movements, before they're fully aware of like context and the history and what needs to be done about it, it tends to come off as shallow and performative because it doesn't really lead to any end goal.
I think some folks have a yearning, most of us do, but some folks more than others have a yearning of belonging. And they have these inner thoughts about what they think should happen for them. And that's all learned behaviors as well. I think all behaviors are learned. So for us to become anti-racist, we have to be taught. Go right ahead. Tell us your name.
Amber. And I guess my experience is kind of that I always thought when I was younger, I mean, I'm an older student, but when I was younger, I always, thought that I was racist and all of this. And then I had a realization in my 20s when I finally had friends that were, of different races, and I saw their experience. And I realized then that I was whitewashing their experience prior to that. And I didn't have any understanding of what they were experiencing. I needed them to tell me what they, you know what I mean? Like I could not insert my life experience into what was going on because then I wasn't acknowledging what was happening to them because I was personalizing it. But once I realized that they had such a different experience than I did, and I started listening, I just felt like I learned more, but it was kind of like learning more in the sense that I realized that I'll never understand. Like I want to understand on a sympathetic level, but I'll never fully understand, and I have to accept that. Like I can't act as if I can speak for them, which I guess I feel like I'm doing now, but that was a big thing for me, is that I just had to acknowledge that people didn't have the same experience I did.
It's taxing in variable ways to say that I need to explain to folks who are privileged that you're privileged. It's taxing in many ways to say that there is no such thing called privilege. It's taxing in many ways to say that we don't sit here in a space that was originally from an indigenous group of people who did not want to give up their land. And what we say now is we have a statement that says something about the land being for someone else before it was conquered, but not using the word conquer. It's taxing on a daily basis to understand that when we talk about anti-racism, we have to prove to many populations, going back to the question about Black studies, we have to continuously prove our worth as a formidable field of study. It's taxing every day to understand that this particular space and many spaces are like it are so controlled by a small group of white men who are so racist to the point that you really don't have. And the best way that you look at it is what happens on a daily basis. We've had diversity, equity, and inclusion for now 10 years, but what has changed? We've had $1 billion industry that represents how we go about change. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, as Malcolm X would say, it's like the fox running the hen house. In many ways, how can we explain that we spend billions of dollars on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we look at graduation rates and attendance rates, and they have been the same for the most part since it began? Let's go right ahead.
I think just to wrap this around the initial question of being an anti-racist without any sort of these programs, I think on some level it's possible. I really think it's difficult to the point where you really do need these sort of programs. Because growing up here in Wyoming, as a white male, I grew up in a super white world where I could have just completely avoided all of this if I had wanted to. And it would have been to no detriment to me growing up here in Wyoming. Without knowing that and making the choice to go do that and learn more, you don't get this sort of understanding of it's not that I'm connected to us versus them. You don't get all the understandings of these different viewpoints. And so I think it's possible that on some institutions, you could do that, but you absolutely, I think, to make any true progress, need to promote these sort of things, and they need to get pushed for that. So I don't think on that initial question, without sort of programs like this, you can really push for becoming anti-racist.
Thank you. And we thank you, Ms. Winfrey, for the question. That's taken us exactly where we want to be. That takes us to Kennedy King. Ms. Wallace just put a cookie in her mouth. I don't know if anybody else saw that. She just put a whole cookie in her mouth, too. A whole cookie in her mouth. I was just waiting for her to put it in there, too. Ms. Wallace, you all right over there?
I'm okay.
Give you a second.
She got a second. I'll introduce her. So
Okay,
she got a second to get that down, cover it down. Get you some water or something, man. Maybe some. All right, everybody. So my name is I'm Professor Daniel Davis. I am actually here with two students from two different schools. Well, one student from two schools. The first is Miss Rakia Wallace, and then next on the program will be St. Xavier, and that is Sydney here that you see ready to go. So I'll start by briefly introducing Miss Wallace. I'll say this: when I was preparing for this event and was tasked with identifying a student to represent KKC. I'm teaching one course in person. My other courses are online. And in that class this semester, we've been having some great conversations, and Miss Wallace has been one of the star participant contributors. And we've been really engaged, and we've been having some good dialogue. So she immediately popped into my head when we were talking about anti-racism and student perspectives and whatnot. She happily agreed to do it, so I'm glad she's here. So Miss Wallace majors in early childhood education. She is expected to graduate next year, 2024. I'm assuming that's May, Ricky?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, so about a year out the way. So I will let her introduce her topic and speak on it for a little bit, and then we can open it up to everyone else. Go ahead, Ms. Wallace.
Well, the topic that I chose is the movement to defund the police department. And upon reading and everything that was going on and what's going on now, like with the police department, I feel like defunding the police department would allow moving in more mental experts, housing people, and social workers. Defunding the police department is going to reduce violent crimes against people of color and overall crime. I don't know if we actually pay attention to the things that's happening around us and things on the news. A lot of the things that are going on is because of the police officers. And one of the main things that I actually paid attention to was an African-American man died in the hands of 5 police officers. And so to say that was just one incident, I just feel like people feel like the police are more of the enemy instead of the help. And that is it. That is all I have for you.
No, that's good. That's an interesting topic. I want you to expand on one thing, though, Ms. Wallace. Well, actually, 2 points. One, because this is an important topic. You mentioned that you think that would decrease crime. So if you could highlight, I think I know what you mean by that, but if you could expand on that. And second, why do you think, because I agree that in many black communities, the police are viewed as the enemy, right? Whether that's true or false, that is the perception in many black communities, right?
Mm-hmm.
In particular, I'm a representative of hip hop culture, right? And hip hop culture, overwhelmingly, what Drake say, get a lot of love from 12 that I don't reciprocate, right? Like they might love me, but I don't love them back, right? Drake's not even a street rapper, but hip hop has this oppositional relationship. So if you could expand on those 2 points, why do you think it would decrease crime for Black people, and why do you think this oppositional relationship exists?
Because if you pay attention and if you listen to the people like in your community and you think about it, that's just like where I live now. When I call, like if I was to call like 911 or something, it takes them so long to like just come out and just diffuse the situation or a problem. It's like, where do y'all be when things are going on? And just how aggressive they are towards people, more so Black people, less so whites, like the overall situations that happens between both groups or just your main, color, like African Americans. It seemed like it's so much beef towards one another, like just pulling us over. It's such a huge issue. It's always a huge issue. It's situations going on right now that just makes people more so uncomfortable with, calling the police or just even police being at certain events is just always an issue.
Thank you. Just one last thing. This is an interesting topic. One last thing. Maybe I'm wrong, but do you agree with this statement? Does it seem to you that even though we all know there are plenty of Black, Latino, Asian, multi-ethnic police officers, but would you agree with the idea that it seems, at least on the surface, at least it reflects like the reflex, the spasmodic response to police, right? It's this idea that police and whiteness are synonyms. Like they're the same thing. It seems like police is synonymous with whiteness. Do you agree with that? And if so, why?
I definitely agree with that. When you think of like how we talk about our issues in class, the same way like we feel attacked by whites, and not saying we all might feel attacked by whites. Like I don't feel no way towards, people of another race. Like I don't feel no way towards them. But just to say, how uncomfortable a white person might make you in the room, same as you being in a room with a police officer, they make you even more uncomfortable. So I could say it all in all goes together. And I'm not just saying that just to say that. It's pay attention to the things that's going around, like social media, your everyday life. You could just look at it that way.
Okay, good. Thank you, Ms. Wallace. So yeah, I guess we can open it up and see if anybody wants to speak on this topic before we move on to Ms. Sydney.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I think it was February, I think it was the third week, I think it was February 20th, we had Ms. Jael Corrende in our class. And Ms. Jael Corrende is instrumental. She was the very first Black student body president at the University of Minnesota. And if you all don't know, just take her name down. Jael, Jael, Jael Corrende, Kerandi. Jael Corrende. And she was very instrumental in starting the defund the police movement. So I've known Jael for about 5 years now. She's a brilliant student, and she got to the core of the issue as an effective, if you will, legislator for her community. And to think now that after 3 years of the assassination of George Floyd, we don't hear much about it. And if I was to say what I really feel right here, Ice Cube said, just another N-word dead. And that's the way I think some police look at it. They say they are good police, and there has to be some good police. But the relationship between the police and the Black community is a relationship that started as slave catchers. And that being the case, from there it has evolved into what we know now as a system, a criminal justice system. And many folks will say that's just us. And it's very criminal. So anybody, defund the police. Do you think it has legitimation? Is it legitimized in anybody's eye? Go right ahead.
I can kind of sympathize with that like tension
Okay.
with the police that the Black community has, because even though I look very white, I am of Latino descent. And back when I had a girlfriend, my ex, anytime we saw police, and she has like a police brother, she's very comfortable with them because she's white. But I would point out police as if to like, straighten up, because that's what my mother used to do.
Sure.
So I can sympathize with that perspective. However, I don't think defunding the police will limit crime. What I do believe is that police need to be reformed, which is anything requires more funding to do.
So reform other than abolish.
Yeah.
Anybody feel like that? Reform other than abolish?
Reforming the police doesn't work.
Okay. No, there's a no answer. Anybody at home, refund rather than abolish?
If I could, I would posit that in defunding, you're working towards creating community programs. This money can be spent in other avenues that are more likely to actually work towards preventing things like gang violence and crime, as youth who perhaps need assistance and find themselves in these situations where they otherwise may turn towards something like a life of crime, do not feel as though they need to thusly turn to crime, because there are systems in place and social safety nets that are being funded to support them through their adolescence into their adulthood, and thusly stopping these things before it gets to the point where police are needed. Because oftentimes American police, as we've sort of addressed here, are more inflammatory and tend to make a situation worse rather than actually stopping the root problem. I think in defunding, these funds can then be reallocated to something that would be more cost beneficial for the community that is being policed.
Here in Los Angeles, I believe it was 2021, there was an effort to defund the police, not get rid of the police, defund. And they, I think it was a little over, I think it was like $1.2 million, something like that, that was taken from LAPD budget and was reallocated to school programs and after school programs. So I think a distinction needs to be made between defunding, where the city budget goes towards the police, where portions of that can be reallocated other places, and then the abolishment. There is an abolitionist movement to abolish the police, which is connected to but different from the defunding. And so I think when we have a distinction between those two, then we can get a little more nuanced in the discussion.
Absolutely. Some folks would say that legally, systematically, the police are the largest gang in the country.
And they were an extension of racists, like especially in the South, like racist groups, they weren't wearing their hoods, but then they became police so that they could do it legally. Didn't stop what was happening. It just made it okay in the public eye because, oh, that's a police officer. So,
Ms. Wallace, just to speak to what you're saying here, I think one of the most corrupt police districts in the city of Chicago is the 6th district, right on 78th and Halston. And there has been, because I'm from right over there, and over the years, there has been many federal indictments that have come in that area. Mm-hmm. And to see the system support certain things is a reminder, and a reminder always benefits the believer. So I don't take it for granted, the difference between your story, my story, or the similarities. But I agree with you that folks feel a lot of tension when the police are close. One thing I've always realized, if there's a police officer there, they could ruin the rest of my day, they could ruin a few years, they could ruin a lot of years, or they could end my life. And that's one way to look at it from the lens of the oppressed. Anybody else about defunding the police? Is it something that should be discussed further, and how would that go? Because people say, well, let's reallocate, like Dr. Claybrook said, to have more social workers, professionals to be involved in some of these spaces. Some of those professional social workers can be very racist.
Can I say
Also, to understand have very little cultural connection outside of Eurocentric thought. That goes back to DEI. It's not hard to do. Go right ahead.
I think a lot of people.
Tell us your name.
I'm Carly.
Carl, go ahead, Carl.
I think that common misconception that the police don't have resources when it's like actually the opposite, where they have so many, and they like now they're being called for to have like accountability and like report all their budgets and whatever. But prior to that, they didn't, and they were spending this money really shamefully, like in a shameful way. So I think that defunding them would be beneficial because it would make them account for like what money they actually have and be more honest and transparent.
I agree with you that the funding has to be part of the reform if there's going to be reform. So go right ahead, Attorney Long.
One thing I'll just say is something that Dr. Angela Davis reminds us is we have to look at the root of things. And if the root is rotten, what do? Can it be reformed if the root is rotten, right? If it was a slave patrol before, I mean, Ta-Nehisi Coates would refer to this as the Ryland Hounds, for those of you who have read The Water Dancer, right? These are the Ryland Hounds, right? And so I think we have to really question whether we can reform, and defunding is a form of reform, but the root is so nasty and so terrible, is it really worthwhile to try to reform and not recreate?
Excellent question.
I mean, I hate to answer a question with, but how do you start again?
Yeah. I think Dr. Davis, anyway, Angela Davis, I wish she was here, right? She was here not too long ago, for those of you, but would say there's a million other things we could be doing. And the collective creativity is the way to begin, right? And, Miriam Kaba writes about this as well, when she talks about, anything worth doing is, worth doing with others. I'm certainly misquoting, I think it was her father's quote originally, but I think we have to come together and come up with those solutions. But I think it's a million things that we could do. Right, a million other things. For example, I've represented families who actually have nighttime patrols in their own neighborhoods in California. So they actually go out at nighttime and they check on their neighbors, and they check on, they check on the gangs, right, and make sure everybody is, taking care of each other. And so that's a form. We have to take ownership as a community for crime, right? And that's one thing. We have to take that ownership first before we can even come up with the creative solutions.
All right. So we're going to move right along. Dr. Davis, you never told us that you worked at the University of Wyoming.
I guess I left that part out because I don't have a personal student representative here. But yes, I'm also a proud adjunct faculty at University of Wyoming as well, in Africana Studies. Definitely.
You got a great student here from St. Xavier. We'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. So next up, and thank you again, Ms. Wallace. Next up we have Miss Sydney Washington. She's a junior. Sydney Washington.
Yes.
She's a junior at St. Xavier University, majoring in media communication with a double minor in English and writing. She also has a self-improvement based podcast channel called Made Originally in Sid's World, which is celebrating its 3-year anniversary since beginning its launch in May of 2020. So again, as I mentioned with Ms. Wallace, when tasked to identify a student, I couldn't think of anyone better than Sydney here. We do discussion posts as part of our class, and in reading Sydney's discussions, she is very, very thorough and passionate in her responses with a lot to say and a lot of thought-provoking comments. So I figured she'd be perfect for today, and I'm very happy that she agreed to join us. So I will allow her to introduce her topic, and we can get to it. Go ahead.
Well, thank you for having me on here. It's a complete honor. And I know this was all like thrown to me last minute, but I couldn't pass up this opportunity. I'm just so glad that I'm on here. So I chose a quote from Shirley Chisholm, and it's on racism and unconscious bias. And it's from one of her book selections called Unbought and Unbossed. And she says, quote, "Racism is so universal in this country, so widespread and deep-seated, that it is invisible because it is so normal. And it's interesting because I am of multicultural descent. So my mother, her being adopted, she has like English, Irish influence, and then from my father's side, my mom's not only African American, but my father's side is also African American. So it's really interesting reading this quote because being like in like a social environment, whether it's in school or at work, you kind of you could become socially isolated just for like doing your part, just being there in someone's presence, and you can experience a lot of different just a lot of different microaggressions or racially motivated things that people don't always notice they're doing. So it could be based on colorism or based around the fact that no one really experienced the Black experience. So I am from a small village in Riverdale, and it's predominantly African American. And knowing that we are underserved, we don't have a lot of resources. A lot of people, when they ask me where I'm from, they'll think that Riverdale is based on the TV show Riverdale. And I'm like, that's not the Riverdale I'm from. And it's really interesting because I'll get like all these questions, and I'll also kind of be pushed to a side a bit. And people don't understand that it really hurts, like not being able to, make friends, not being able to feel like you belong. And also, when I like try to like venture out and like go to different places, I do see just predominantly white people. And I do often get that taste of experience of like when like people of a darker skin complexion can judge me based on my skin color, or of another different race, will all of a sudden just seclude me out of a conversation and think like I'm okay with it. It can really really change my perspective of how people view me. So when I like try to meet new people, I like to not only accept them, but I like to embrace the diversity. I like to embrace like the diverse environment around me, because if you're always like stuck to one race, or you're kind of stuck to one kind of social environment, you're not really getting the taste of that real experience. So knowing that a lot of people, with unconscious bias, they don't often think that their actions or words are responsible for what they do. It's kind of mind blowing because I always like to learn. I'm always learning from other people, but then also there's a lot of people that don't like to learn from me. And it's just something to kind of recognize that, with racist backgrounds, racist practices, and even just reading about, how to be an anti-racist, it's the matter of fact, like you can't be a follower. You have to almost lead by example in a way. And I prove that not only in my studies, but I try to prove that when I'm around people. I like to work on a team where people are going to accept me for who I am, not based on the my skin color, but more on the premise and my moral character. So I really like, to not think about racism as something that it's like something we have to avoid. It's something that we have to face up front and realize that it's not okay. And being affected by this, it touches me. Like even the previous conversations we've had, even about like the Buffalo shooting, to know that there's so much hatred in the world. Nobody really wants to reconcile because people are not at peace with us, an opposite race, and people are like thinking, since they're different, I can treat them a different way. We're, so divisive that we can't come to that commonality, that we're all human, but if we dehumanize the opposite race, we're not going to come towards any solutions. So that's kind of how I wanted to close out on that. And I know my mom watching right now, she really has like a personal connection with Shirley Chisholm. She actually met her when she was younger. So shout out to her. And I really thought that this was a very kind of thought-provoking quote.
Excellent. Yeah, the very thought-provoking quote. And yeah, you put some stuff again, this is what you do, right? You put some more stuff on my head. And now my mind is spinning. But I just have a follow-up question that we can open it up. But I do have a follow-up question for you. From what you're saying, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, expand on this. It sounds like exposure, maybe. Do you think the way to kind of fight back against unconscious bias, systemic racism, or as the quote alluded to, this racism that's kind of interwoven into the fabric of the country, do you think the solution to that is simply exposure, even if it's quote unquote, or not quote unquote, even if it's, I guess, directly, even if it's forced exposure to other people, like forcing people to engage with each other? If you're part of the dominant society or the majority culture, you honestly don't have to engage with other races of people, right? So how can this issue ever be solved? How can we ever? So do you think that would be, a primary approach to ending racism or fighting against it, forcing exposure to other ethnicities? Expand on that if you would.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, because when I honestly saw like the video about the Buffalo shooting, to like the fact people having a choice of whether they want to pursue a major or take kind of a Africana studies or diversity general requisite course. It's a matter of like, white people choosing to live the life that we already live. When we're born into something, we're born into a neighborhood that is literally separate from the opposite neighborhood, where they literally try to divide us so we can't be a part of their community, we can't be a part of an entity, and we kind of have to base it off of what we already kind of form ourselves. So when they talk about defunding the police, we kind of have to reform our own community building. We have to basically protect ourselves when we should be able to just kind of walk down the street and not, fear the police. Like sometimes when I'm just driving, I'm always like, okay, I'm making sure I'm not looking down texting anybody, because I don't want to be pulled over, or I don't want the police following me all the way to my house. And, what's the next step after that? What's that consequence? So I wouldn't say like forcing people to kind of all get along would be the solution, because obviously there's a lot of people who have been taught from the day that we're born that, oh, you can choose to be in a diverse environment, or you can choose to kind of be in your own little world. I mean, I've been sheltered all my life basically, where I have been in a Black community, but then I also was able to have that privilege to venture out to a predominantly white Catholic school and really see white privilege show itself. And I would say that it does exist, because a lot of people, they're able to afford things. I hear people saying, I have a cottage in the summer. I'm able to go to my summer cottage. While over here, my mother's like short on bills sometimes. Sometimes we can't always afford to pay for things. And, it's just, it's really hard, like, having to kind of be in an environment where, again, lack of resources, we're not given a lot of like financial benefits or financial assistance. We have to just come up with the money ourselves. So when people are saying, oh yeah, I'm broke, I'm poor, I'm like, try having an income that's under 25K and, live our life for once, be in our shoes for once. So I think mostly, because even like when I take classes, it's about like speaking from personal experience. If people like don't go with what you go through or undergo any of the challenges or hardships that you endure, then they really like they won't face that like same trauma that you experience. It can be emotional trauma. It could be just about the Black experience, just going out there and not being able to like be socially engaged in a community that's going to accept you for who you are. And, I just want to reiterate that, like, being socially isolated because of the, color of your skin, you feel like you don't belong or fit into a group. And that also, you can't really connect well socially as well.
Thank you, Sydney. So I guess we could pass it to Professor Dixon and open it up. Thank you.
Excellent. You got me very interested in how I can listen in on the podcast.
Definitely.
Around here, be very happy to, try to help be a part of that conversation. I think you did an excellent job. And I want to make sure that I'm in step in my space, keeping it with the time. So we have a question from the University of Wyoming, and then we have a concluding question. So are you guys ready?
You want us to go now?
Come on.
Come on, Luke. Hello, everyone. My name is Lauren McLean. I look like I'm 12, but I promise I'm not. Professor of law here at the College of Law. This is my student, Luke Dainty, who runs.
Does not look like he's 12.
Does not look like he's 12. So we are part of the Defender Aid Clinic. I'm an attorney, and we represent individuals who are harmed and suffer the consequences of the criminal legal system, not the criminal justice system. Let's be very clear. We had originally hoped to discuss with you this idea from Dr. Davis of increased criminal punishment is most often a result of increased police surveillance. And certainly just a few comments there briefly, but then I actually want to throw a curveball. I'm going to do the attorney thing. I hope you're okay with that, Dr. Fred. You're not going to jail. I got your back if that happens. Don't you worry about that. So this idea of increased criminal punishment, is it most often a result of increased police surveillance? And just to allow you to think about this for a moment, let me provide you with some information from a lawyer's perspective. The United States Supreme Court has authorized racism. It has authorized racial profiling through Wren v. United States. In 1996, at the height of mass incarceration, we had a unanimous court. Let's include RBG there. Some of our heroes, some of us might consider her a hero of at least women's rights. Certainly not necessarily a friend to racial justice, however. So I want to be very clear about that. She signed off on this unanimous opinion that authorized racial profiling, which is this idea that a police officer can pull you over because you're Black and investigate you and potentially search you, your car, and then eventually maybe even shoot and kill you, as we've seen with way too many individuals. And so, a huge study that came out of North Carolina looked at traffic stops, 20 million traffic stops. So the data is substantial from 2002 to 2016. It's in a book called Suspect Citizens, found that actually in just 1 year's worth of data, Black Americans were 63% more likely to be pulled over than white Americans. They were more often pulled over for investigatory stops. So we're talking about out tail lights, things like that. Philando Castile, for example, was pulled over for an alleged out tail light, told the officer he had a legal weapon in his vehicle, said he was going to go for his driver's license, and kept telling the officer that. And the officer said, kept saying, don't do it, and bam, 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 right? And I thought about this when my wife and I were recently pulled over. I didn't tell you about this, Dr. Fred. We were pulled over this weekend by a very angry officer who thought we did something wrong, who immediately came up to our window and said, "What are you doing?" and started yelling and screaming at us. And I thought, thank God, Dr. Dixon, this is not you. Because I get to pass. I'm an LGBTQ member, but I'm white as can be. So I get to pass, which means I get to survive that stop, which means I get to talk back to the officer, which surely, an attorney did, right? And we didn't get a ticket. I told him to kiss my ass, basically. But you know what, Dr. Fred, I'm not sure you would have made it out. Yeah, you would have said to kiss your ass right before. But anyway, so this idea of increased police surveillance in Black and brown and poor communities, right, increases criminal punishment. But I'm going to throw a curveball, and that's this idea that earlier on Buffalo State was talking about a very important event, and that is the Buffalo Massacre. And as we were going through the massacres, there was an ending comment each time, and no one was prosecuted, And I want to challenge all of us to think about this for a minute. What is the role of the carceral system here when it comes to reparations or perhaps retribution in this context? I'm not sure, but I guess my point is that the carceral system came on the heels of slavery, right? And lynching became the death penalty, and the deliverers of the death penalty is the all-white jury that used to be the all-white mob out on the courthouse lawn, right? And so this idea that I constantly have to ask this question that I think Miriam Kaba or Andrea Ritchie proposes, which is you must kill your inner cop, right? And this idea that the carceral system somehow provides relief when we have these types of massacres, but it's a carceral system that is incredibly racist, systemically, institutionally. And so is that really the relief, right? Is that there must be prosecution. And so, and again, it requires that I kill my inner cop, because that son of a bitch in the Buffalo Massacre, I mean, how awful, right? But yet, is the carceral system the appropriate way to handle and provide relief to those families and the community? So that's actually the question I prefer to propose today. But I'm certainly open if you want to talk more about the racist U.S. Supreme Court too. We can do that too. Okay, I'm going to repeat the question. So the idea, I'm going to go with this question, which is should we use the carceral system as a form of relief for racial terrorism? Let's call it that, racist terrorism, right? Is that the form of relief we want to use when that has historically been a racist system? And historically, and even today, African Americans, the brown and black people, poor people are overrepresented in that carceral system. So is that the answer? That's the question I'd like to pose. Thank you.
Anybody here online?
Yeah, anybody. Any of my Crim Pro students who are learning all about the racist U.S. Supreme Court. Mackenzie.
I think the struggle comes from the fact that as a society, like what we have set now, we have decided basically that the prison system is the freedom system, yet it's the powerful and conservatively white that are able to avoid this system. So that's where like the initial anger comes from, of they're able to avoid it in the first place. However, I think it's something we discuss a lot in the clinic and class, is that it's really hard to squash that idea of justice that we've had to grow up with and be indoctrinated to, that in order to get justice, there has to be prosecution and there has to be imprisonment. And that is the answer. And that's the way that you punish someone and show them how wrong they were. And so especially when we see those wrongs that are happening, it's really difficult to not go, well, like, they should be sent away, they should be in prison for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And I think that the actual anger is in the fact that they are able to avoid that while others aren't. And so I think in general, like imprisonment's not the answer. I don't think it's the answer in general. I don't think the prison system, like you said, has such a history of racism and a overrepresentation of minorities and just how it is set up. I don't think that like, just prosecution should be the answer all the time. But I think that anger comes from the fact that they are the ones who are avoiding it, and while others are not. So I just think we need to find a different system to put in place that is that retribution. I just don't think we've just figured it out yet.
Can we reform the system the way that you're saying, the way that you laid it out to us?
I think it's similar to the policing issue that, as Lauren said, it's kind of a root issue. It's really hard to think about reforming or fixing something when the root of the issue is so deep down and that's what's broken. And so I don't know if reform is the right word, but I think an alternative, I think, would be more of the answer of looking at what actually fixes or helps the issue of addressing the issue and not throwing the person away. And so, but I think it's more finding an alternative to the prison system that we just should move toward, and we just haven't figured it out yet.
Glad to hear that come from such a young person. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Dr. Davis, a couple weeks ago when she was here, she said it's so automatic, right? Punishment is so automatic. It's the first thing we think of, right? It's just so, it's human nature, right? So this is hard to think about and talk about. I appreciate it, Mackenzie. Anybody else out there? Yeah, Allie.
I don't think that the carceral system is the way to go. I don't know. I don't have any ideas on how to fix it. I think one thing to kind of maybe shift our focus on though is what happened before, what is the root issue of crime. And so, for instance, you know, so I'm Native. I grew up on the res, and there's a public school on the res, and they have SRO. They had an SRO there, and it was just causing a lot of issues.
Student resource officer, right? Yep. Okay.
It was just causing a lot of issues. There was a lot of students that were ending up in in-school suspension, expulsion, all of this. And so we started, well, I don't want to say me, but like the administrators started looking at how can we start shifting this as punishment to kind of looking at what's causing the issue here. And so what they started doing was when students were getting into trouble, getting into fights, they were pulling these students in and they were having tribal elders come in and they were talking to them, telling them stories about our way of life. They were sending them home with food. They were providing mentors, and these things started to shift. And so I don't know if there can be a change. I mean, I don't know, because punishment, because I feel like these things need to be addressed after they've been done, but I think maybe we can start alleviating those issues and we can start providing support to communities, underserved communities, communities of color, poor communities, all of these things. So I don't know that the carceral system benefits anybody, but I also see that there's a need to hold people accountable.
Yeah, and I think that Miriam Kaba would say when we're talking about abolition, which is what we're really talking about, I think, right, is we're not talking about no accountability and no consequences, right? We're just talking about no carceral system, no carceral punishment. Yeah, I appreciate that, Ali. Thank you for sharing that story. Are there folks online that this struck, maybe even from our folks at Buffalo State? I'd love to hear what you think maybe about what I said about this awful situation, but is the carceral system, is prosecution, the sort of a form of relief? I'd love your take on it. Brandon, you want to go?
Yeah, I do agree with what you say, and I don't think like incarceration is enough, because you have these things like the death penalty, life in prison without parole. It's obviously not enough, because these things are no secret. People know the risks and they still decide to go through with what they go through with. And then they come online in the courtroom in shackles or chains with these fake apologies, pretending like, oh, I messed up and I did this and I didn't mean to. You know you meant what you wanted to do. So I do think that reform or transformation is necessary within. I don't know how to word it, but
Wording it quite well. Keep going.
thank you. But it is definitely necessary, because what we do have in state now, it's not enough to strike fear into what these people are doing, and it's definitely not helping with the families that are affected.
Right. Yeah, I feel like I need to have you come talk to the judges here in Wyoming, Brandon, because what you're talking about is something very smart, which is this idea that the carceral system does not provide deterrence. And that's one of the reasons we punish in this country. One of the 4 primary reasons, right? Retribution, rehabilitation, incarcerate, just like isolation from the community. And then finally, deterrence. And deterrence seems to always be heavy on the judge's mind during sentencing. But in fact, what you're saying is supported by empirical data and just quite frankly, common sense at this point too, is that the carceral system doesn't provide any form of deterrence of crime. Thank you for your input.
If I may, I think it's useful to point out that the police don't seem to be a deterrent either, because one of the things that came out of the Buffalo community that really upset people, besides the actual act, was how the criminal was peacefully apprehended after mass murdering so many people. When in very recent memory and ongoing, we have all these cases of Black folks hardly doing anything and just getting murdered for it.
Right.
And here you have someone who actually murdered all these people and was treated like a citizen with rights, and so forth. And so it seems you can pull off an act like that, and being killed by the police for doing it, isn't something that tends to happen. So that's not even a deterrent for doing it. If I'm saying that
yeah,
clearly.
Thank you. Anybody else? Dr. Fred, you want to take over again?
Yeah, we got one more question.
You do.
And we're gonna
Thank you
wrap
all.
this up. And for everybody who came, we want this to be a question that we all take to heart. I mean, it's something that is so very connected to our social fabric, to our daily rhythms. And we're going to have this question introduced by Athalia Jimenez Stetman, who's graduating with at least one degree in African American Studies, and she has more. So come on up, pose the question. Everybody hold still. This one will be something that I think is very important for us to discuss.
Hi, my name is Athalia, and I'm really grateful to be here today.
Take your time.
So our overarching theme for this question today is going to be hate speech, and our secondary theme is going to be the popularity of rap music. The question I'm presenting today is, due to the global popularity of rap music and the controversial rhetoric that defines its culture, is it okay for non-Black people, primarily whites, to say the N-word because they hear it in a rap song? I present this question because being in Wyoming, this is a constant battle that many of us fight every day. You know, you go out to the bars or whatever, Gold Digger comes on by Kanye West, and everybody in there is saying the N-word, when in reality there's almost no Black people in there at all. And then this is still a constant struggle that I have within my own family, particularly my family of color, who are not Black, thinking it's okay to say the N-word whenever they want, especially within music. So I'm presenting this question to really get an understanding of what it's like being in Wyoming, and then also other people's take on it.
Read the question again, please.
So the question was, due to the global popularity of rap music and the controversial rhetoric that defines its culture, is it okay for non-Black people, primarily whites, to say the N-word because they hear it in a rap song?
Can we start at home? Find out at home. Somebody wants to go right ahead.
I say no, it's not. No, it's not. It's not okay. It's never okay. In a song, it's not okay in conversation. It's not okay. It's not okay for me to say to my Black cousins or aunties or uncles. It's not okay.
Anybody at home? Find out if anybody at home that wants to answer that question. Dr. Claybrook, your thoughts on that?
Michaela has a thought on that.
Yeah. Go right ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm of the perspective that it's not even necessarily correct or appropriate for Black people themselves to say. I don't think that, you know, we should really strive to continue using such degrading language towards each other or, you know, the community at large, be it through the act of trying to reclaim the word or not. I don't think it's a word that we should, you know, essentially try to reclaim. We should move forward with other, you know, words in our lexicon beyond those that are based in enslavement and dehumanization. That's where I'm of the perspective. So no, it's not appropriate for people in a global audience to say it. And I would argue that we here, you know, shouldn't be saying it either. I know my Black family don't say it, unless there's some, but we don't talk about that. We don't talk about their use of it because it's still inappropriate.
Got anybody back there from the intro class, intro African American history? You got some thoughts back there? Ms. Douglas, what's your thoughts on that?
No. I don't think we should be saying the N-word or any other race that's not Black should be saying the N-word in songs or music.
So because it's in a song, it does not give people the right to say it, right?
It doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't give you a right to say it. Because if you so comfortably of saying it in a song, you could be so comfortably of saying it to me. And you just gonna catch these hands after that.
Bust a grape in the food. Anybody else about this as we wrap this up? Because we know that the word is used. Oh, we got somebody? Yeah. Go right ahead, Brad.
Okay, this was one of our class discussions in the past. I don't believe that any white person should be saying it, even if it is used in a song, because it's been taken from its negative connotation in the past and adopted in the Black community as something that can mean friend or companion or homie, I guess. But it was also brought up in the same class discussion that our fellow African Americans can use the word the same way that right racists can use and can put each other down with that word. So I want to say it's a very subjective thing, and it depends on the context and the code switch, because there are certain times where I use it when I'm with a certain group, and then other times where I don't because it's just not right to do so. And plus, people have told me like I sound like they tell me that I sound like a white person when I say it, and that kind of just rubbed me the wrong way because I look just like you. What do you mean I sound like a white person? Like that's not right for you to say.
If I can, I just want to just share just a quick reflection. When I was an undergraduate, we had we call it a rap session. About 60 people in there. I think all, if most, if not all of us were, identified as black. And this was the topic. Should we be saying this? And there was a diversity, just like here. There's a diversity of a lot of people saying no, some people saying yes, but it depends on the context, right? And so that it really came. There was no real conclusion to the conversation. But what we did do, we were challenged by one of our advisors to say for about, it was either a week or 2 weeks, don't say it. Don't say it for about a week or 2 weeks. And instead of saying the N word, and this is amongst us, this isn't even about the other communities of people, this is about the black folk themselves. Instead of us saying it to each other, challenged us to refer to each other with reference to like our African ancestry, refer to ourselves as king, refer to ourselves as queen, refer to ourselves as brother, refer to ourselves as sister for like a week, no more than 2. And we did it. We did it. And white folks around campus were scared. It was palpable. We walking around saying brother and sister and king and queen, and they was like, oh my God, what's going on here? Like it was transformative, right? And then for us, many of us like even began to feel like a difference in ourselves. It changed how we actually interacted with each other. And then after that 2 weeks was over, we went right back to it, and so all was lost. But it was just an interesting exercise, an interesting social experiment for that week or 2 weeks, whatever it was. So I just wanted to just share that about the power of language wherever we fall on the conversation. And I know I have my position on it, but it's just that power of language, and even just for a week or 2 weeks, whatever it was, how we just changed that word, it really impacted how other people saw us, and it impacted how we saw and interacted with ourselves, right? So I would love to do that on a larger social scale and see the impact of it. But I thought it was just a relevant reflection to share with this conversation.
Anybody here want to bring this to a close with an answer about this?
Dr. Dixon, what was that quote you told us in our themes week that was made by Lyndon B. Johnson about if you make one, oh God, I don't remember it off the top of my head, but essentially it came to the point that if you make
them hate like themselves, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you make a black person hate themselves, you can then bring the entire culture down.
Okay, so I think the quote that you're talking about with President Lyndon B. Johnson, what he said was, as long as you give a white man someone to hate,
I gotcha.
then he won't in himself find a way to look at other folks as, and I'm paraphrasing, other folks as his equal.
Okay.
Now there's another space here that Malcolm X said, only a fool allows their enemies to teach their children. So that in itself will bring us to close, and thank you, Brian. And let me explain to everybody at home, we appreciate this time for our students to have this. So before everybody leaves, let's just make sure that we give a round of applause to our students because you did an excellent job. If the space is not providing these opportunities for you, it's really about you all creating these opportunities for yourself. As Dr. Claybrook said, he said, we got together, it was 50 or 60 of us, and this is what came out of it. Feel free to use this medium of Zoom and these spaces where we don't have to necessarily be in the same room. But we at the Black Study Center are really wanting to have these conversations with you all. But we want you all to take the lead. Ashe? All right, everybody. Thank you all again. Hold on, everybody at home, hold on. I'm gonna get a selfie. I don't know how this is gonna look. It's gonna be terrible. Marcus waves. All right. We can only thank you all for all of those professionals, these good folks who came out to bring their students. Excellent job for you too, you all. Excellent job. But the students, very proud of you all. Great job today. All right. Travel in peace, good people. Want to take one step to say this. Dr. Claybrook, it was the thought of the most honorable Elijah Muhammad sometimes in the 1940s where he forced us to call each other brothers and sisters. We just want to be historically accurate. So you all have a really good evening wherever you're at. And thank you all. You guys did an excellent job. Toby, thank you. The great Toby. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Thank you all. Have a good evening, good people.
Good job.
Yeah.
So